Welcome to Marketing Made Simple TV. I'm Jeff Ogden, the host of the show, and we're thrilled to have you back once again. Last week we had a great guest, Chris Malone of Human Branding, and he talked about the two things that make a brand, warmth and competence, which warmth is friendly, outgoing, nice person. Competence is you know your stuff, and that is the epitome of our guest on the show today, Rohit Bhargava. He's a top author, he's a non-boring keynote speaker, and he's a nice guy. So let's welcome Rohit to the show.
Hey, thanks for being here.
Hi there, good to meet you. Good, I've spent a lot of time on your website and your blog, and I've learned a lot about you, and I always wanted to have you on the show, so I'm glad you're finally here. So I'm going to start you off with the question I ask every guest on the show, Rohit, and it's a really simple question. Who are you and what do you do?
My name is Rohit Bhargava. I have my own marketing company called the Influential Marketing Group, and I've written a couple of books. And what I try and do is inspire better marketing.
I like that. It's nice, simple, and direct, and inspire better marketing. I mean, there's a cause we all can get behind. So now I understand you're coming out with something very soon, some content that you want to tell the audience about. Tell me about what is this thing you're working on right now?
Yeah, so every year I spend pretty much the whole year, starting on January 15th, which is my birthday. So that's the day that I start collecting information for my annual trend report. And the 2014 report's been a little bit behind the usual schedule because I usually get it out in January. But this one's been a lot more work because I did something a little bit different. So next week, the trend report is going to come out. And essentially what I've done is curated 15 trends in 5 different categories for what I think is going to affect the communications and marketing landscape for all of us moving into this year. So I'm really excited about it. It's been a lot of work, and it's literally sort of a week away from coming. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to share that.
So Rohit, you did a lot of research on trends in marketing and what's happening in the marketing. So give us some of the takeaways, some of the surprising things you learned from doing that study.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I learned is a lot of the so-called trend work that's out there is just declarations of things that are so impossibly broad or self-serving that they're pretty useless. So if you see a trend, for example, that says 2014 is the year of the tablet, what does that mean, right? Does it mean more people are buying tablets? Like, who cares? What does that do for anybody? At the same time, like you see somebody who maybe has a data analytics company and they say that 2014 is going to be the year of big data because they have a big data company. So what I tried to do was separate all of that stuff out and not focus on what I wanted the trends to be for my own business, but rather on things that I could prove from stories, from interviews, from things that are out there, from basically real cultural trends. So that's what the report tries to do.
It's good. I just read the book by Chris Malone on human branding, and it's like a thesis. I mean, he researched it so heavily and with footnotes and everything, and I really found that refreshing to read something like that. Now, another thing you mentioned is that you just completed about a year of being on your own. Talk about your personal journey and what you've been through, because I'd like to hear about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think people who might have seen my blog and my work in the past, they probably associate me with being in a big marketing agency. I spent most of my career doing that. I mean, I was leading digital work at Leo Burnett in Australia. Then I worked for Ogilvy based in DC, but sort of working all over for many years. And in December of 2012, I left all that and decided to have my own company and just focus on my own projects. And so for the past year, that's what I've been doing. And I think for me, the biggest thing that I realized after leaving a job at a big company was just how many things I had conflicts with that I couldn't do. And once I became my own boss and once I had my own company, a lot of those conflicts sort of disappeared. There were certain companies that I used to not be able to work with because they were conflicts, and now I didn't have that anymore. There were some speaking events that I might have wanted to do that conflicted with client projects, and now I didn't have to deal with that anymore. So it really did give me a sense of freedom in terms of not having conflicts, as opposed to the freedom that you typically hear of somebody who they work for themselves and so they can make their own schedule. I mean, all of that stuff is great also, but for me it was just that all of these people who were in my world of marketing that I maybe couldn't have collaborated with before because my agency was incompatible. Now I can collaborate with them.
It's interesting how going out on your own has given you a lot more freedom to kind of pursue what you want to pursue, and that's great. So I know you also teach at Georgetown University, you mentioned at times. So talk to me a little bit about big picture, what you see going on in the world of marketing. What are some of the major challenges marketers are having? What are some of the recommendations you would make to marketers of what they could do to get better results?
Yeah, I think one of the things. So I like how you said sometimes with the teaching, because that is kind of my schedule with Georgetown. So I teach my previous signature class was a global marketing class, and so we studied a different country every week, and the whole class went to London. It was kind of a cool format for a class. And right now I'm working on a new concept for a different class. So I'm call it in between classes at the moment. But one of the big things that I've been spending a lot of time looking at is the media landscape right now. And so one of the trends in the report that I focused on was something that I called curated sensationalism. And it was essentially this idea that previously we had creators and consumers, and now we've got this model where there's something in between, where there's these huge media properties like BuzzFeed and Upworthy that are just taking stories that are already out there in some sense and adding a new layer of paint to the top of them. So a great example of that was when we had the new Fed chief declared. Janet Yellen was declared new Fed chief, and that was a big deal, a big story. And the headline in, I think it was BuzzFeed for that story was, her husband won a Nobel Prize, but she just became a way bigger deal. And it was exactly the same story that you could get everywhere else, but it just had a different headline that people saw and said, "Oh, I want to read that story." And it was this repackaging that I think is such a big part of the media culture right now. And so I really wanted to dig into ideas like that and say, well, what does that mean for us as marketers? If repackaging is a different value than creating something brand new, and maybe repackaging by itself is a new form of art that we didn't necessarily consider to be art 5 years ago or even 3 years ago.
It's interesting. Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of repackaging of content out there. So now one of the areas of experience you have is a lot of international business too. You mentioned you worked in Australia and everything else. For companies that want to expand internationally, what is important for them to keep in mind?
I think the biggest skill set that I see in people who are successful in global business, and I try and do this myself, is embrace your hidden powers of observation. A lot of times we tend to think, oh, if we're going and doing business, I mean, the typical model for I'm going to do business in China is I need to read everything I can read about doing business in China, and then I'll just follow the rules, quote unquote, and I'll be fine. And actually, that never gives you a complete picture, because what ends up happening is there's something that isn't written down that you would never have known about. And I think that one of the things that amazed me, and actually one of the examples I use for this, is the difference between driving in India versus driving in America. Driving in America, there's very specific rules. There's lane markers, there's traffic lights, people follow the traffic lights. If you don't, the police pull you over. There's a very specific method for driving. And so what ends up happening is when you drive in America, you feel like, as long as I obey the rules, I don't care what anybody else is doing. I don't need to pay attention to anybody else. I don't even know what somebody else is doing. I'm just focused on myself and my own driving, and I'm going to obey the rules if I'm going to, and I'll be okay. Whereas on the Indian road, everything is a suggestion, right? The lane markers are a suggestion, the traffic lights are a suggestion, and so what ends up happening is the only way to drive safely on a road like that is to communicate. You have to look at what somebody else is doing. You have to see whether they're going or whether you can go. You have unwritten rules, so things like, a car gives right of way to a truck, a scooter gives right of way to a car. I mean, the bigger thing gets the right of way, which makes sense, but it requires communication. And I think what you learn from that situation that applies to global business, and the reason I shared that story is when you're communicating and paying attention to the little details, then you're really setting yourself up to succeed. And when you're just saying, give me the rule book and I'll follow the rules, you're setting yourself up to fail.
That's interesting, and I think obviously what a lot of companies would do is go find a salesperson in China, hire them, and think that's a strategy to expand to China, which obviously it isn't. So, what do you think about that? The idea of doing it what I call the lazy way, and hiring a national, and there you go. That's your strategy.
Well, I mean, there is a power in having someone local. No doubt. The challenge is if you're just hiring a hired gun, so to speak, they don't have any real investment beyond financial in what you're doing. And so the challenge of that is they can get up and walk away, and then you're screwed. You don't have anybody, you don't have any way of dealing with that. So I think that hiring someone in a local place, like your example noted, can be a great way of doing it, but they have to believe in what you're doing and have more than just a paycheck coming through for doing that. And when they do, then you can actually realize some success by not having to build everything from ground zero. You can actually build from finding the right people. But as with anything in business, and particularly expanding into global business, finding the best people to work with is the.
I agree with you. Finding good people has got to be such a hassle. How do you recommend the companies go out and find the best people? I mean, I look at one example where I was working for a company in the UK, and I hired a guy because he had industry experience and had a great resume. He was a disaster. So I call resumes they're absolutely pointless. They don't work. So what do you look for instead?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, as a writer, I could convince people of anything on a resume because I can write it. Doesn't mean it's true. So I think, first of all, I mean, one of the big things that I often did back in a previous role when I was doing a lot of hiring is I wouldn't look for experience first. I'd look for attitude and culture fit first. And I've written a lot about this, particularly around the lens of likability. Which is one piece of it. The idea that we choose to work with people that we like. I mean, that's the premise of Likeonomics, one of my books. But I think when it comes to hiring, we really do need to hire for who's going to have the right attitude to be able to be part of your culture. And hopefully they have some of the experience, but more experience can always be taught if they have the right attitude. It's very difficult to retrain someone's attitude if they have the right.
Interesting, and I agree with you 100%. But the problem is you can't really see having the right attitude from a resume. Resumes don't convey attitude. So
yeah, I think one of the things that again, it comes down to observation. I mean, one of the things that really good hirers have done is they have little tricks. I mean, I remember talking to a consultant who helped companies with hiring one time. And she was telling me that one of the tricks that she would use is she would call a applicant for a business for a role at like 4:15 on a Friday, and see if that person returned the call or whether they waited till Monday. And by doing that, she was basically testing whether they were the type of person to follow up on something right away. Again, attitude, right? That's all it is, or whether they would let it go. And for that particular role, they really needed somebody who would jump on things right away. And I thought that was just one of those interesting ways of trying to get to something that you're right. That would never be in a resume, right? You don't put on your resume, I return calls within 15 minutes or whatever it is. But when you get tested on something like that, then you can really see, like, does this person have the right kind of personality to fit?
I like that, Rohit, because that's a personality test that you can kind of test their temperament. This has been a really interesting conversation. I wish we could talk longer. Where can our viewers learn more about you, about your books, about the things you're doing? Where can they go to get more information?
The best place is probably my personal website. It's just my first name, last name.com. So Rohit, R-O-H-I-T, Bhargava, B-H-A-R-G-A-V-A. I think it's right down there on the, the other side, right there. So that's my personal website. Or if you want to find out specifically about the trend report, you can also go to 15trends.com, the number 15, and then trend.
I want to thank Rohit Bhargava for being a great guest on the show. Check out rohitbhargava.com and 15 Trends. I think that's what he just said, but you can always go back and listen to it. Before we go, we want to thank our sponsors, because sponsors make this show go. Avatage is a great content marketing company up in the Boston area. DigitalEthos.org is a educational company, nonprofit. Communication Strategy Group is brand telling and PR, and Watch It 2 provides this wonderful platform. In addition, I just want to let you know we're going to have a really, really big announcement from the show at the end of this week. We've got a new partner that we're just so excited about. That's going to make so much value for new sponsors. So stay tuned for that. Marketing Made Simple TV premieres every Thursday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. It encores on Sunday at the same time, and 2 weeks after the premiere, it syndicates to all our syndication sites. So till next time, we'll see you again on